Hello, Godfrey First, and anybody else that might be watching. This is this week's edition of Joe's Devotional, or as I'm calling it, De-JOE-tional. I know it's corny, but what do you expect? So this week we talked with the youth about the first key in Mr. Rogers' book, The Mr. Rogers Effect, about becoming a better neighbor. And this week's topic was about listening. And the first thing we did was talk about the difference between hearing and listening. Now, hearing, as you might know, is white noise. It's static noise. It's things that just kind of happen around you. I can hear the air conditioning going right now. I could hear Susan over in the other room. She just moved in her chair. I could hear it. And I could hear the TV going in the other room because, well, we always have the TV going. I just heard the dog walk on the hardwood floor. So it's just little white noise things. I'm not really focused on it. And when we're listening, that's an action. We're actually engaged. I'm listening for a specific thing. I'm focused on it. So right now I know the TV is on, but I don't know anything that they're saying. But if I stopped and focused on what they're saying, Ross just said, it's fine. Believe me, I would too. But I didn't know that beforehand. So that's the difference between hearing and listening. So we're going to talk about that. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone and all of a sudden you realize you have no idea what they're talking about? Yeah, so that's happened to me before. And usually, I know it's happened to a lot of people, and the youth all raised their hands on Sunday and said, yeah, it's happened to them too. And usually we try to lie our way out of it, or we just kind of, oh yeah, right, and give a nod and move on. There was a time a few years ago I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was talking about wiring and electronics and stuff that I have no knowledge on. I don't know anything about it. And next thing I know, I realized he had asked me a question, and I had no idea where he was. And I said, you know what? I got to be honest with you. I checked out about 2 minutes ago. I couldn't even lie my way out of it. It was so awkward. And I know we kind of got a laugh at the time, but I felt so bad about it. Has that happened to you before where you're just in a conversation, all of a sudden you don't know what's going on? I was just hearing what he was saying. I had no idea what he was saying. I wasn't listening. I wasn't focused in on his words. I wasn't trying to understand what he was saying. I was just kind of letting him go. So we all have a desire to be listened to and not just heard. And that's the first of Mr. Rogers' secrets. To bring out the best in ourselves and others, we must learn true listening. Often we listen to respond or to critique or to argue. And again, how many of you have done that before? When you're in a conversation with somebody and instead of really focused on what they're saying, you're formulating a response. Or you're trying to figure out an example in your own life that you can share. I know I'm guilty of doing that. So what happens when that happens? What happens to your conversation when you are trying to respond or you're trying to come up with your own example or critique? Your conversation falls apart because you're not really paying attention to them. And the speaker often can tell. So sometimes we have good intentions. When we're wanting to share our own experiences, we think that we're just relating, that we're telling the speaker that we understand because I was in a similar situation, right? And we have good intentions with that, and usually that works. But oftentimes what happens is the speaker may see that as a competition. Well, I can't tell Joe about my bad day because he's going to tell me his day was worse. And it's competition. Facebook is full of that stuff. When you have people say, oh, and students do this all the time, I was up until 12 o'clock last night. I'm so tired. What does their friend usually say? Oh, I was up until 1, man. I'm really tired. And then somebody else, I was up all night, man, so I'm more tired than you guys. No, it's not a competition. Nobody cares. But we tend to do that in our conversations. We also have a tendency to try to fix their problems instead of share our own. And sometimes our enthusiasm to share our own experience overrules our empathy and we fail to listen well. So that's what happens. When we try to fix it, or share our own stories, we lose our empathy towards their situation and we don't listen as well as we should. So then we got into a conversation about how many people have someone they can really talk to. I mean, really talk to. When I first said, how many of you have someone you can talk to? Well, everybody raised their hand, of course. And then when I said, how many of you it's like really something serious that you can talk to? There were still most hands, but not all. They were a little uncertain then. We all have a tendency to have people, or we all have people that we have surfacey kind of conversations with. But do we all have somebody we can have that deep down, moving, emotional conversation with? So I asked them all to think about somebody. And the person they thought of could be different for whatever their situation is. But I asked them, why that person? Why is that the person you go to when you have something you need to get off your chest? What is it about them that makes you comfortable? And I got answers like, they're trustworthy, they're loyal, they show a care for you, they show that they care for you. And the one I like the most, you know they're going to tell you what they need to hear. There are certain things that we go to certain people for. Now, if we're talking about TV shows, or we're talking about classes with the kids, or we're talking about the weather, that kind of thing, it really doesn't matter. We can talk to strangers about that. We also have found out that there are people that we can't really talk to, because what's the first thing when we go to somebody and we say, hey, don't tell anybody this, but what's the first thing that happens? They're going to go tell everybody. As soon as you say, don't tell anybody, that's like an invitation to tell everybody. So we got to be careful when we do that. But what characteristics do those people show? And they shared those, and it was pretty cool what they shared. And we decided that being heard by a receptive listener, by somebody that cares for us, is similar to being loved. That if we're talking to people who tend to just talk about themselves, or if we're talking to people that tend to blow us off, or we're talking to people that just try to fix our problems, or they're negative all the time, we're not going to feel that connection. We're not going to feel loved. But if somebody is looking right at us, like Mr. Rogers did all the time, looked right at us and paused and waited for a response, you're going to feel that connection. You're going to feel that that listener actually cares about what you're saying, and then cares about you, and you're going to feel loved. To be heard truly and authentically is to be known. And true knowing is different from simple familiarity. Again, we talked about how you can have surfacey conversations. I'm familiar with all the kids in youth group, but I don't really know all of them. I know a few of them because I've known them for a long time, but I don't really know all of them. So how do we move from that surfacey kind of small talk to a more deeper conversation? Now, speaking of hearing, I can hear the dog bark, and I can hear Susan telling her to be quiet. It's all right. She's fine. So how do we move from the surfacey thing to the deeper conversation? How do we find these caring, engaged, loving, active listeners? The best way is to become one ourselves. Become somebody that is an active listener. If I go up to somebody and talk to them and they have a tendency to blow me off all the time, how am I going to respond to them when they come to me with something? I'm probably going to blow them off too, right? So if we become an engaged, active listener, then they are going to become an engaged, active listener. And we can do that by paying attention, withholding judgment. That's a big one, withholding judgment on people. How many times we've seen somebody come up, ooh, they're going to start this conversation with me and I really don't like them because I know they're going to say this and that and it's just wrong. I don't agree with them. So judgment. Patience, another one. Active listeners, good active listeners are patient. Sometimes the speaker can't get it off their chest. They don't really know what to say. I told the kids I started watching the new season of Ted Lasso on Apple TV. Love, by the way. You guys have to watch it if you have the ability to. Anyway, this season they've brought in a team psychologist. And her role, she tells them, her role is just sit and listen. And she sits with them for an hour because it might take them an hour to actually get what they need off their chest. And usually, if any of you have been to any kind of therapy, any kind of therapy am I thinking of? Not psychology or something like that. You tend to answer your own questions as you're talking, right? Have you ever done it? As you are speaking aloud to a therapist or a counselor or somebody, you tend to answer your own questions. So you have to have patience when you're an active listener. Body language. You can't listen really well when you're doing this, right? Or, my favorite, when you're doing this. Oh, yeah, yeah. That's not an active listener. So you get body language is key. Restating. They say something, I really don't like it when this happens. They say, oh, so I understand you don't like it when this happens. You have to be able to restate those questions. And then ask questions as you go through. I also gave them just a kindergarten version. My eyes are on the person talking. My body is still. My mouth is closed. And I'm not thinking about anything else. Those are 4 keys to being an active listener. So we are consumed by noise. When I first started this video, I talked about all the things I could hear around. And I can hear somebody weed eating now. The dog is eating and barking and doing other things. So I can hear all new things in addition to the TV and Susan walking in the kitchen. And there's all kinds of stuff. We're used to noise. How many of you have been to out in public or when you're shopping or something and the person waiting on you has a headphone, an earbud in, or an iPhone, iBud, whatever it's called. And they're listening to music while they're waiting on you and doing their job. That is so annoying. Because to me, they don't have their full attention on me. But our youth are growing up in a society where they feel more comfortable with noise going on. And I thought about that and I realized, you know what, I do the same thing. I hate when the TV is not on. I'm not watching it, but I got to have that background noise. I got to have that static noise. It's so weird, but it's a thing. So there's other types of noise that we have to overcome in order to be good listeners. We have environmental sounds like we've talked about already. Physiological noise. I didn't think about this, but if we're dealing with headaches or we're not feeling well or it's too hot in the room, Barb, too hot in the sanctuary. If people are talking too fast or slow, that's all physiological noise that prevents us from being a good listener. Then there's psychological noise, your attitude, your belief. If somebody comes up to me and is really negative about what they're saying, I will tune them out. I don't care what they have to say. There's a right way and wrong way to say it, and I'll tune them out if they come up to me like this. And then there's semantic noise, grammatical errors. If somebody comes up and they're just, more on Facebook. If somebody writes a response to something and there's spelling errors and there are punctuation errors and all that, their opinion doesn't count in my mind. That's semantic noise. And then cultural noise, there's people have different postures and gestures and things like that. That's different. So we have to overcome all that noise. We also have to overcome social media, texting, email, all that kind of stuff is clamoring for our attention and it's distracting us from being present. So we have to do away with the noise as much as we can. Good listeners are active. They're not passive sponges who quietly listen and nod along. They're focused and engaged, and they make eye contact and keep their mouth closed more often than open. Mr. Rogers was very thoughtful about his presentation. He looked directly into the camera and directly into our eyes. He asked thoughtful questions and paused as if to listen to responses. So, a few quick points to wrap up. Being heard is similar to being loved. And we all have a desire to be loved. If you want to be loved, you have to love. If you want to have somebody be an active listener when you have a problem or something you need to talk about, you need to be an active listener as well. Listen with your heart as well as your ears. Be prepared to ask uncomfortable questions or listen to uncomfortable answers or listen to uncomfortable questions. If you truly care about the person you're engaged with and talking to, you have to be prepared for uncomfortable stuff. And that goes back to the people you talk to. One of the reasons is that they're going to tell you what you need to hear. There's a chance that you're not going to like what they say, but you need to hear it. So be prepared for that. Rather than listen to reply, we need to listen to understand. We need to eliminate as much external and internal noise as possible. Understanding that every neighbor is worthy of being valued and respected is the first step to truly know and understand our neighbors. Mr. Rogers, I love him. I can't wait to finish the other 6 points in this series. I look forward to talking to you again next Tuesday. This is this week's edition of De-JOE-tional. We'll see you all next week.